Thank you very much, Gildas, for introducing me. Thank you also for inviting me to speak here about one of my favorite topics today, and that's about uncertainty. And that's what I'm going to do the next 20, 25, perhaps 30 minutes. And let me put my cards right on the table. My conviction, my claim is that really taking into account uncertainty and also complexity, but I will not focus too much on complexity today, but taking into account uncertainty provides an alternative approach, an alternative paradigm even to economics, to the social sciences more generally, to how you govern a company, how you supervise the financial system, to supervision more generally, to investing, and what else. It really is a different paradigm, meaning that taking into account uncertainty makes you look differently, to think differently, and also to act differently. So it's impossible in the time that I have to really go into detail of all the issues. So my agenda is basically four things this morning. First, I would like to really elaborate on what I think is the crucial difference between a risky future, risk, and uncertainty. And then I will, after having done that, I will briefly touch upon three areas, exploring a little bit the consequences of this difference. First, I will say a few words about consequences for capital regulation, let's say Basel III. Secondly, the consequences for generally how to do risk management or how to run a business more generally. What the consequences are for the quest for long-termism that we often hear nowadays. And finally, I would like to say a couple of words on the consequences for valuations of companies and investment strategies. So first, on the difference between risk and uncertainty. I have sent in a couple of questions. I don't know whether they have been put here. If so, may I have the first question? You can read the question and please vote on this one. So may I see the results? It's 85-15. So I can go home. That's simple, and of course it's clear from what I've said so far that I'm also in the yes camp. But let me make more precise of what I mean of the difference between risk and uncertainty, because in normal language the two things are mixed and therefore blurred a little bit. So risk is a situation where you know all the possible outcomes of any action, but you cannot know ex ante which actual outcome will prevail. So the classic example, of course, is flipping a coin. It's heads or tails. It's two possibilities. If it's a fair coin, both may happen, but you don't know which one. But you have the complete list of possible outcomes. And if you are in such a situation where you have a complete list of all the possible outcomes, then you are in a nice world, as it were, because you can apply the probability calculus. You have a really solid basis for quantitative risk management. There's a very solid basis for portfolio theory. The capital asset prices model can be founded on that foundation. It's also a very solid basis for quantitative investment strategies, and so on. So basically, a world of risk is a world that is not so different qualitatively from a world in which you know for things for certain. You still can calculate. You can make probabilistic forecasts. Now we move to uncertainty. And uncertainty is a situation where you do not know or cannot know all the possible outcomes of certain decisions or actions. Sorry. Now the important thing is that the situation of uncertainty is really the real life situation in which we human beings have to operate, inevitably have to operate. It's the inevitable human condition. And it's for logical reasons. And the simple logical reasons is that human beings cannot know now what will be discovered in the future. By definition, if you would know now what will be discovered in the future, you know it already. So real novelty cannot be known now. That means that if you take a decision today, that the consequences of that decision may be impacted by things we cannot know now yet. And this goes beyond random disturbances. This may be very important qualitative change. So that's why the future is not risky, but is uncertain. So that's a situation where any human being in taking decisions finds himself or herself in. So there's no logical, or let me say scientific ground, objective ground, for all the nice techniques and methods that we use in risk management or in making forecasts on a daily basis. So there's a very strong limit to predictability. And that limits are inherent, are inevitable. That's one of the few things that we can know for certain, that there is a strong limit to predictability. So that doesn't mean that you should stop making forecasts. But you should, in trying to do so, you should be very, very humble and being aware, like I think it was put very, very nicely in the first panel, that you can know very little, and that forecasting is no science. It's an art, and also responding a little bit to the first panel, even if you were to have robots, that would not get us around a logical problem. And it's even so that if you would program a robot having to make a decision based on, let's say, all the information that the robot would need to make the decision, it would never make a decision. It would be so you cannot make rational decisions, purely rational decisions, in a world where you don't have all the information that you would need to have to make a rational decision, and that information is not there by definition. So that's not how we can act, and that's also not how we act in practice. So the only thing you really know is there's always the possibility of surprise. Positive surprise, then we call it an opportunity. A negative surprise, we call it a threat, or perhaps misleading a risk, because I think better call it a threat, because otherwise we start to blur the definitions. So let me now, so that's the definition between the two, and the real world we live in. It's very clearly is a world of uncertainty, and in any decision that you take, basically it's against the background of uncertainty and not risk in the pure sense as I have defined it. May I have the second question? So we're now going to elaborate a little bit on regulation and what this conclusion about the difference between risk and uncertainty means for capital regulation in particular. So, can I see the results? I really play a home game. I believe it's again pretty clear in favor of a yes, and again I agree. Still, it is the case if you look at Basel III that the rules for minimum capital are primarily based, I should say, on risk, risk-weighted asset, risk-weighted capital requirements. We have a leverage ratio as a backstop, but still it is very much risk-based. Now the interesting thing is that it has been shown, I think, more than 50 years ago, that in a world where you have risk in a pure sense, so where you can capture the world in probability distributions, there's no need for holding capital. Volatility, because that's basically what it then is, can be priced in, can be insured. There's no reason to hold capital against that. There's no foundation for risk-based capital. Theoretically, risk can be priced. So for that reason, risk-based capital requirements are flawed. They're flawed. Apart from the negative consequences that they may have for other reasons, but they are deeply flawed from the perspective of the distinction between risk and uncertainty. Now you may say, let's then just focus on the leverage ratio. I think that is not, in the end, is not good enough. There's no time here to elaborate on what a good capital regime would be, but it would, let me give one element, it would far more base itself on stress scenarios in combination with the capital that you need to resolve a certain company. Because capital, the role of capital, let's say in a theory based on uncertainty, is essentially to give you a buffer, a capacity to buy time to recover, try to recover from whatever surprise has occurred. So it's a mechanism for buying time, so that you are not too close to the abyss and fall into the abyss immediately if something unexpected will happen. And again, something unexpected will happen all the time. So that's the role of capital, and you have to think about how you calibrate what you find acceptable there. Let me move on to my third issue. Again, rather briefly. What does this mean for the governance of companies and countries and all kinds of institutions? The quality of business decisions, or any decisions, is significantly influenced by how well a company, let's focus on a company, deals with the inevitable uncertainty of the future. I've over time developed what I call a framework for acting under uncertainty and complexity, called FAUC. And that is a a framework that is based on the theory of human action and interaction in a world of uncertainty, based on ingredients from modern complexity science, but also from older work in the past. And that's interesting. If you think about how to act under uncertainty and complexity, you're not only easily led to modern work on complexity in very different disciplines, but you're also led back to I'm an economist, so to economic work earlier in the 1930s by Keynes himself, the original work of Keynes. Keynes wrote a treatise, did his PhD on uncertainty, treatise on probability. Fascinating book if you look at it from this perspective. If you are led back to what is nowadays called the Neo-Austrian school in economics, with people like von Mises and Hayek in particular in this perspective. Hayek for the interaction of people, human beings. He's also dealt with complexity himself, and von Mises for the human action part. So I've tried to connect these things, and I think that gives you a very good framework for thinking about how people act and interact under uncertainty. And that leads you to a framework for action and interaction under uncertainty. And that has a number of pillars which themselves can be further elaborated. But let me just for today mention the pillars. But before doing that, let me go back to one issue, perhaps anticipating questions that I often get. When I say that it is there are strong limits to predictability and forecasting and to quantitative risk management, I don't mean to say that. I think I already said it, but I cannot emphasize it enough that you should stop doing that. But there are two things that I then add. First of all, and that I already mentioned, don't fall in the trap of thinking that you are doing science. I think the same mistake that the central banks made, and the point was made in the first panel. And I fully agree that is a mistake that central banks made. I've been one myself, so I've made a mistake perhaps myself partly, is to think that you have a science of monetary policy, that you can target inflation on the 10th point. And it's striking. I cannot, refrain from mentioning that point. What I don't understand about the ECB at this moment is that I was at the ECB when the strategy was formulated, and it was stressed so much at that time that the ECB was not an inflation target. We repeated that time and again. We emphasized all the time that we had a definition of inflation, but not a target. And somewhere over the past few years, it is only the past few years, the ECB has fallen into the trap of seeing a definition and an objective as identical. There's a very recent speech, for instance, by Peter Praat, where he starts out that we have a definition of inflation, and then a couple of paragraphs later in the speech, he starts to talk about we have an objective. And we have to hit that anyway. When the strategy was formulated, central bankers were much more humble than that. They were aware that this at some point could backfire, and that moment is now, I think. So be humble, and secondly, do not restrict yourself to just forecasting. You have to do a number of things in addition to that, and that's where my framework relates to. And I can today only mention a couple of elements in that, and each of the elements can be elaborated. So the company, you're talking about a company, must be alert, adaptive, resilient, innovative, and imaginative. And you can elaborate that, and it has consequences for the role of buffers in your company, for the IT system that you have, how you organize your management information, because I think it is an illusion to think that big data will help you, because big data can only be data about what is known already. So the most important data are not yet there. That's the future. So big data can perhaps do a lot, but not solve this problem. And it will not help you. What the natural inclination is to try to get as much information as possible. That's often the reflex, collecting more and more information. But the problem is in an uncertain world and in a complex world, by definition you cannot not even have all the information to describe the situation today. Very quickly about a lot of discussion that there is nowadays about short-termism. I think there is rightly a quest for more long-termism, but at the same time, that should not be overdone. I think there's very little that we can say today beyond horizons of 3, 4, 5 years. So trying to be too detailed beyond that horizon is simply not rational. Is simply a waste of time. Let me quote here again Keynes. Now indeed in his PhD on probability, there he said somewhere, it's not wise to attach too great weight to things that are very uncertain. So that means that we have to find the right balance between short-termism and long-termism. And if you look at different languages, there are also some sayings which really alert people to, in the first place, take care of what is important today and only focus later on what is happening in the future. So we should not overdo that. So far more important again is, given that uncertain future, is that you have a horizon that's beyond 1 quarter, of course, but that's a couple of years at best. But be very alert and open to responding to all the surprises that will happen, and find an adaptive trial and error way towards what you want to achieve in the longer term. May I finally have the third question? And the results here. Well, it becomes boring. But again, so it was the last one, so I will not bore you further talking about things that you were already convinced of and well aware of. Here I tend to disagree, and again, looking at it from my own perspective and from my own framework, I think there are, if you take this seriously and really dig deeper, there are consequences in different fields, but also in the area of evaluating companies, and then also for investment policies and strategy. So my impression is, but you disagree, that generally speaking, there's not too much attention, let me put it that way, or sufficient attention, let me put it in that way, to this aspect. If you look at the company, how well does it deal with the uncertain future? How well does it deal with complexity? How resilient is it? How adaptive is it? How does it sense the environment? How does it monitor what's going to happen in the future. So if that is right, and if there is a relation between how well a company does in this area and in the longer term its results and how it copes with the surprises that there will be, I think there may be scope also for investment strategies focusing on how well companies deal with the uncertain future. I think there are more consequences for investment strategies and also for perhaps for business models of asset managers. I think there's a lot of room for research to be done in that area. I'm partly focusing on that. Two final things. Dealing with uncertainty well very much tilts, let's say, the type of investment strategies more in the directions of more active strategies, and also, final word, also more in the direction of seeing investing far more than just, let's say, making a balance between risk and return, also trying to really influence the strategy of the company you invest in. So this was very briefly how I think about the importance of uncertainty, a little bit also complexity, hinted at some of the consequences, and I think a lot of further work to be done in that area. But thank you for your attention for now.
Do we have any question to Lex? I have one. We had on the first panel a pretty good split between investors in looking at emotion and fundamental. Is emotion the biggest part of uncertainty?
I would turn it around. If you think about fundamentals from this perspective, basically what you have in mind is a future, a world, where there are some given factors, what we call the fundamentals, what determine where you go. So the future is, as it were, already there. You only have to discover it. Whereas if you look at it from the perspective of uncertainty, the first conclusion is immediately the future cannot be predicted, but it can be imagined. So what people do is they have an imagination of the future. They think about the future and they act on the basis of those imaginations that they have. That's not irrational, because there is no way to know the future. So they act on that basis, and they interact on that basis, and basically in interacting with each other and with acting, they shape the future. So the future is the outcome, and the fundamentals are the outcome of action. So the causality is the other way around. In the traditional way of looking at it, is you have objective fundamentals for the future, and ideally you find those fundamentals, you discover those fundamentals. So the expectations are determined by the fundamentals, whereas in the actual world, what we call the fundamentals are formed and shaped by the actions which are based on, can be based on anything, imagination, it can be emotion that plays a role. So I have difficulty to end this long answer. I find difficulty with making a distinction between emotions and fundamentals, because they are intertwined, but in a different way than traditionally done.
Thank you. Please join me to thank Lex Hoogduin. Thank you very much.